On January 25th, 2022, the public test server, or PTR, for Diablo 2 Resurrected will finally be equipped with patch 2.4. This is exciting news, but the patch notes are quite tedious and often repetitive, so in this video I'm going to briefly go over the more important updates as they pertain to PvP and general gameplay. I'll link you to the patch notes in the description so you can check them out in detail for yourself, because we're just going to be breezing over sort of the biggest pieces of these here. Let's take a look. I'm going to start by looking at some of the good things about this patch that myself and a lot of other people seem to be pretty excited about. Let's start with this one right here. Insight, the popular rune word for polearms for your mercenary, can now be made into bows and crossbows. This is pretty dope. You can now up set items with the same Heraldric cube formulas that we were using to up unique items. This is pretty sweet as well. There are many new level 85 areas to farm in the end game. While we still would have loved to see the false tombs on this list, I gotta say I love the attention to this. They made some seriously powerful changes to an underutilized Amazon skill called Impale. This could have some effects on PvP, good or bad, who knows, but I'm actually happy to see some underutilized skills like this get ramped up in power. Charged strike synergies have been sort of reallocated. This is a bit confusing to read, but it basically means that if you're making a Lightning Furies on, you can still do that, and you'll have to commit as many skill points to this form of Amazon as you did before. However, if you're using sort of some of the other skills such as Charge Strike, you'll actually have more skill points opened up to you, while these skills will seemingly do pretty similar damage. This is going to open the door for a lot of potential hybrid Javazon builds, which I think is extremely healthy and could have some positive effects in PvE and PvP. When you combine this with the changes that they made to Plague Javelin here, I think this is a very real possibility. The Amazon skills Dodge and Avoid are now interruptible. This means that an Amazon will no longer be stuck in dodge animation until she dies in PvE, completely defeating the purpose of the skill. It could have some unintended effects in PvP, but I think overall it's a pretty good change. Kick skills have been fixed. This was quite annoying in PvP with Dragon Talon, whereas the kicks would ignore target defense. They couldn't be blocked. They were like mini smites. They would always hit your opponent. This will still be the case in patch 2.4 if you charge up your kicks with another martial art skill first. I actually really like this change. It takes out the cheesiness of just the always hitting kicks, but still keeps that ability there if you've charged up your skill. Many of the casting delays that made hybrid builds sort of awkward have been removed. This is huge news, definitely for the better. For example, you can now cast Frozen Orb and not have to worry about it affecting how fast you can cast Firewall right after that. Just about all skills that were affected by this sort of delay between skills seemingly have been fixed, and this is huge for PvE and PvP hybrid builds. They removed the Death Century skill from being a synergy to seemingly anything else, but increased the subsequent synergies on all of the skills affected. This again is pretty complicated to read, but it basically means that Trapsins can now take a more hybrid approach while still harnessing the power of Death Century if they want to. Very good change overall, in my opinion. Berserk now receives bonuses from battle orders instead of Shout. This does affect PvP a little bit because Shout is usually the skill that players dump their remaining points into, and it's rarely ever maxed out. This will make Berserk hit a bit harder, but considering how difficult it is to actually position your barb in an optimal spot to get a Berserk off onto your opponent, I actually think this is a good change. A risk like that in PvP should definitely be worth the reward. You can now cast Cyclone Armor when you're shapeshifted. Let's hope they did the same thing here for Teleport. Oak Sage and other Druid spirit skills were apparently immune to physical damage in Nightmare. This is a glitch I was totally unaware of. That's been fixed, and a little bit of physical damage resistance has been added to all of them. GG. And a big shout out to the 1.09 players. Nova Sorks are back. Nova is receiving some new damage bonus synergies along with Thunderstorm. This should make for a great Lightning Sorceress build that doesn't necessarily need Infinity to farm areas in the end game. The skill Blaze got a big damage boost in this patch and now also increases your run and walk speed. This will be really fun on an Immortal Sorceress, especially wearing the new rune word Flickering Flame. You can now spam the ever-loving shit out of Hydras. You can have up to 6 Hydras active at once and there's no casting delay. Their damage bonus has also been increased. This is definitely a big change and could potentially be a real threat in PvP, and I love seeing the potential for these new builds to arise in the dueling arena. Now, that being said, let's move on to some of the things that are sort of concerning or just really lackluster in this patch. So concerning most of these new rune words, I think Xtimus said it best on Twitter. I only partially agree, whereas Flickering Flame is actually pretty cool, but other than that, this guy's spitting the real shit, homies. Why make new rune words giving more attention to underutilized runes if those rune words will never really hold a candle to the pre-existing ones or the more desirable items in the game? All in all, I think the power of new rune words really needs to exceed the ones that already exist. Someone sort of made a trolly post on Reddit about this, and while this one is sort of a little bit over the top, I think it's kind of on the right track. I've said for the longest time, we really just need other rune words that are cheaper that give characters access to teleport in one way or another. Doing so actually opens the game up infinitely to new possibilities. So even though this was a big troll on behalf of the internet, I think it was kind of on the right track. I gotta say, the set item changes are kind of ass. None of them really matter, and nobody's going to be using these sets any more than they already do. I'm just shooting straight here. I understand that the point of making these changes is to sort of assist players doing regular playthroughs of the game, and I respect that, honestly. I respect the attention to that. However, even then, there's better options than just about any of these full sets or even partial sets. When you consider that finding a full Millabrega's Regalia or Cow King's Leathers or Cyverb set, finding full sets of these even early on, hell, even Arctic gear, is actually far more difficult than just going to Countess and farming Tal and Eth runes and making Stealth or making Malice or making some of these really cheap rune words that just seriously outshine these set items at that level. All in all, I'm just really confused about the changes here. Why change those if you're not going to make them better than other options that are significantly easier to get? Now, I really want to dive into the serious ill effects I think that this patch update will have on PvP. And before we get too deep into that, I want to address something that I've seen people put in the comments before and just sort of address a certain concern. Some people say that they don't care about PvP. All they do is PvE. They do meth runs, chaos runs, etc. Look, I'm right there with you. I do chaos runs. I do, in fact, a lot more MF these days than I do PvP. But one thing that I hope that we can understand as a community is that PvP and PvE are a lot more related than most people care to admit, especially people that are only doing PvE, are only doing chaos, or they're only farming certain endgame areas. They're a lot more related than you might think, and balance is balance. Just think about any skill that you think might be broken in PvP. That skill is probably also broken or busted or overpowered in PvM as well, right? For example, the skill Mind Blast, right? A lot of people complain about this in getting into PvP. They think Sins are so busted because of this skill, and honestly, I probably agree with you to some extent. But that same skill also kind of allows you to cheese PvE, right? After level 24, when you have Mind Blast, the game becomes a lot easier when you're playing as an assassin. You can convert minions and just sort of walk through them at will when you need to, or if you can't kill them. So certain skills in that regard that are broken in one are sometimes broken in both. But additionally, they're related in another regard, right? So let's say you're just doing PvE, you're just doing your meth runs, your magic finding runs, and you're trying to trade your items. The fact that you can trade those really rare chase items, those perfect uniques, those 230-20 2 open socket helms for ridiculous amounts of high runes or FGs or whatever your trading medium is, the reason for that is because of the PvP people that play this game. People aren't doing meth runs with a 230-20 2 open socket helm. They're dueling with that. So even if you're just going after these extremely rare chase items, hoping to either keep or trade them for their inherent outside value, these things are a lot more related than you think. If one class is overpowered in PvP and everybody is just sort of forced to play that build or the counter to that build, then all of the other items that you could find that could otherwise be chase items are just going to be significantly lower in value because they don't matter as much as the items for one class that's significantly OP. So like it or not, the PvP, as much as some people just choose to ignore it or choose to pretend that it doesn't exist or matter, actually matters far more in your magic finding runs than you think. When you couple this with the fact that many people believe PvP is what kept the game alive for 20 years, it's something pretty significant and is something that I respect the fact that the developers have focused on, not just in the recent patches, but in many patches throughout Diablo 2 LOD history. It has always been something that has actually been on the forefront of balance when considering changes to this game. That being said, there are some skills or balance changes that I think are significantly one-sided and are very detrimental to not only PvP, but just have weird effects in PvM as well. I'm gonna start with the biggest one, where if I had a silver bullet and could say, hey, please just don't do this in the patch, it would be this one right here. I'm looking at Bone Spirit for the Necromancer. Now, I understand the concern. There's, you know, a serious lack of use of bone skills in PvM, with the exception of Teeth. Teeth is really the only skill that has a large area of effect, can take out a lot of monsters, or at least address a lot of monsters at once. However, something to consider is that these bone skills are extremely powerful in PvP. In fact, there's been glitches in the past that made these bone skills hit about as hard as they're going to hit here, and it was addressed. Things were changed. In fact, I think this change right here will actually make these bone skills hit harder than they ever have in the past, even with glitches involved. The glitch I'm talking about is with Marrow Walks. It used to be the case that the charges on Marrow Walks would actually act as a synergy if you had no skill points into that actual skill. So essentially, your Bone Prison charges would give you a level 33 hard point Bone Prison to bump up all of the damage from the rest of your bone skills here. So keeping that in mind, they are increasing the damage on Bone Spirit from all of its synergies by 33%. This is huge. So taking this into consideration and just doing a rough estimate here, I would guess that decked out PvP Bone Necros could probably do about a 9k Bone Spirit. This is extremely dangerous and detrimental to the PvP community when you take into consideration that a Bone Necromancer is already an S tier build. This isn't a new build. This isn't something that needed a boost. And when you also think about the fact that Bone Spirits are launched so far across the blood more that they become invisible, and opponents are hit from screens away with projectiles that they can't see, these things, in my opinion, don't need to be doing the same amount of damage as a hammer. I think this is just a very miserable way to address an underutilized skill in PvM. But I also think, on that note, there's really no value in bumping this up in PvM either, and here's why. First of all, bumping these up by 33% isn't even going to do a significant amount more damage to the monsters in PvM. In fact, even if it did, people will still opt to use skills such as Teeth or Bone Spear because they pierce targets or they address multiple targets at once. Bone Spirit is still not going to be something that people use even against bosses. And even if it was, Necromancers aren't going to address crowds of monsters with Bone Spirit, or really many of these bone spells here. They're going to get their first kill with Bone Spirit or Bone Spear or Poison Nova or whatever, and then just corpse explode the entire room. Nothing about these skill balance changes is going to change that. I just think this is such an underwhelming change in PvE or PvM, and a very detrimental change in PvP. Again, if I had a silver bullet, I'd shoot that one right out of the sky. Other changes that I see as pretty detrimental in PvP and not necessarily as cool in PvM are these offensive aura changes. So Holy Fire, Holy Freeze, Holy Shock. Now, while it's really cool that these auras are going to do so much damage, I think there's some people that are building Tesladins or Auradins that are like, wow, yeah, rah, rah, auras. But the truth of it is, Auradins are a really miserable build in PvP and often are used to grief players in public games. But again, I know some of you are not interested in PvP, so let's talk about PvE with this change right here. If you look at any Auradin build or any Tesladin build, a lot of times they have other skills that are supplementing their damage from these auras. The auras are a nice bonus to their attacks, but they're not something that is meant to destroy entire groups of enemies that they're going after. While it would be super fun to walk past monsters in the game and have them drop at your feet, I'm not sure if that's sort of the level of challenge that was intended in this game. Another concern I have about buffing really any of these skills with the Paladin is this one in particular. I was a little scared about this when I heard that this skill would be changed, and I really don't like how this was addressed. The casting delay on Fist of Heavens, or FOH, was reduced from 1 second to 0.4 seconds. While I do think that the increased damage from Holy Bolt here is actually pretty cool with how it works with Fist of Heavens, I don't think reducing the casting delay here is really going to make a big impact. So in PvE, people are probably still going to opt for Hammerdins in a lot of cases, but in PvP, again, we're taking these already S tier builds in the VT or in the Fist of Heaven's Den, and we're just sending them to outer space. It isn't that Fist of Heavens isn't necessarily powerful in PvM, there's just better options. Reducing the casting delay from this is not really going to change that, but reducing the casting delay on this in PvP, again, will make an already powerful build so much more powerful. Now, I understand nobody's using a Fist of Heaven's Den to go around and wreck Chaos Sanctuary. I can promise you that still won't change with this. Along those same lines, there's been some changes to guided arrow, and again, I would just really caution what we're doing here. People are still not really going to commonly use guided arrow in PvE until they have end game gear. And we're talking about increasing the damage bonus here by 40%. Now, I'm not sure if you have seen how powerful guided arrow is in PvP, especially considering that it can hit from many, many screens away. But increasing the damage here by 40% is the equivalent to making it so that PvP players remove all of their damage reduction gear when going against a Zon. Not sure if you've ever been in that situation or experienced it, but I think there was a reason why guided arrow was nerfed many years back. It's because it's already extremely powerful, and to increase the damage here by 40% is irresponsible in my book. Also, the speed at which barbarians can leap has been increased by 75%. I'm not sure if you've ever seen barbs leap lock players or even teams of players in PvP, but it's pretty miserable. I'm not sure if this is a great change right here, but you know, we'll see how it goes. I want to couple this with something else positive, because I hate ending on, you know, a negative note with the things that I don't like. I did see something super positive about this patch, which may actually address this exact concern right here. And that is in the general gameplay changes. Number 3 here reads, character hit recovery will now have diminishing returns when being hit by another player. I'm not exactly sure what this means or how to interpret this, but the fact that the character hit recovery will be in some way diminished in PvP, and that characters won't need as many frames at some point to recover from hits, is absolutely phenomenal. This means that potential leap locks, like we talked about before, mind blast locks, smite locks, whirlwind locks, things that just sort of push players into this perpetual animation of not being able to respond, will seemingly be a thing of the past, or will at least be mitigated in some way. I really like the attention with this piece right here to PvP, and I gotta say, I really do appreciate the fact here that the developers are actually focused on PvP and are keeping this in the forefront of their minds. It's been my conviction for years that faster hit recovery should just not be a thing really as much in PvP, or that the frames should be significantly reduced. And if this is what they mean by that, then this is a beautiful change for all PvP players alike. Regardless, those are my thoughts on the new patch 2.4 for Diablo 2 Resurrected. Let me know what you think down in the comments, what the most significant changes are, or what your feelings are about this patch in general. Thanks for watching.